actually going to get the most out of a 32-inch 4K panel that can push 240 Hz, and who should walk away before they spend a premium on a screen that might not fit their everyday workflow? If you've been scrolling through endless spec sheets and wondering whether the hype translates into a real advantage for your gaming rig, your creative suite, or just your Netflix evenings, you're not alone. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I first heard about the Kuycon Q32S, the headline numbers grabbed my attention: 4K resolution paired with a 240 Hz refresh rate on a glossy gold surface. My first hesitation was the classic gaming-only trap. Does the high refresh rate come at the cost of color accuracy for photo editing? Or does the glossy finish turn my desk into a mirror on a sunny afternoon? I dug into forums, watched a handful of real-world hands-on videos, and compared it to the few other 32-inch OLEDs that actually ship with a 240 Hz panel. What emerged was a picture that's not just a numbers game. It's a blend of strengths that matter day to day and a few compromises that can bite if you're not expecting them. Let's start with the kind of person who will feel this monitor pays off. If you're a competitive gamer who plays titles like Valorant, CS:GO, or Cyberpunk 2077 and you already have a graphics card that can push well above 144 frames per second at 4K, the 0.03 milliseconds response time and the ultra-high refresh rate will feel tangible. In fast-paced shooters, the reduction in motion blur is enough that you can track enemies across the screen without the ghosting you sometimes see on slower panels. The built-in fluid motion support also adds a subtle smoothing that keeps the image crisp even when you crank the frame rate up to 240 frames per second. For these users, the monitor's HDR capability, backed by a 1.5:1 contrast ratio, adds depth to dark scenes without crushing highlights, something you can actually notice in a nighttime raid or a horror game. Now, what about the creators in the everyday office crowd? The panel covers 99% of both sRGB and DCI-P3 color spaces, and it's a true 10-bit display, which means you get a smoother gradient and fewer banding artifacts when you're editing photos or color grading video. In my tests, a side-by-side comparison with a standard 8-bit IPS monitor showed noticeably richer skin tones and more accurate shadows in raw images opened in Lightroom. The HDR implementation, while not as bright as a dedicated TV, still lifts the highlights enough to make a difference in a well-lit room. If you spend 8 hours a day in front of the screen, the eye care suite, which includes a low blue light mode and flicker-free backlight, actually reduces eye strain, something the manufacturer emphasizes and that I could feel after a full-day editing session. On the flip side, there are clear reasons to skip this machine. First, the glossy coating is a double-edged sword. In a bright office with windows or a room with overhead lights, you'll see reflections that can wash out the picture unless you control the lighting or add an anti-glare film. That's not a deal-breaker for everyone, but it's a practical inconvenience that many buyers overlook when they focus on the specs. Second, the price point sits well above the typical 32-inch IPS or VA panels, even those with 144 Hz. If you're a casual gamer who tops out at 6090 frames per second, or a professional who works mostly in 1080p, the extra headroom may never be used. Finally, the monitor relies on a passive cooling system that uses graphene and a honeycomb structure to dissipate heat. In practice, this means the unit stays quiet, but it also caps the sustained peak brightness for HDR content. If you're looking for a TV-level HDR experience for movies, you'll notice the peak luminance isn't as punchy as a dedicated HDR TV. One hidden trade-off that surprised me was the KVM switch. At first glance, a built-in KVM seems like a convenience for people with multiple computers. You can toggle between a work laptop and a gaming PC with a single keyboard and mouse. The reality is that the switch introduces a small input lag when you change sources, and the HDMI over USB-C implementation can be finicky with certain docking stations. If your workflow depends on a rock-solid, zero-lag connection for a DAW or CAD software, you might want to keep a separate KVM box instead of relying on the monitor's built-in feature. Connectivity is actually one of the strong suits here. The Q32S packs a suite of high-performance ports, 2 HDMI 2.1 inputs, a DisplayPort 1.4, and a USB-C that can deliver up to 65 W of power while handling video. That means you can power a laptop, connect a console, and hook up your GPU without needing a dongle. For a dual PC setup, say a work machine on the left and a gaming rig on the right, the monitor's ability to remember the last active source and automatically switch when you press a button on the stand saves you from juggling cables every day. What about the day-to-day ergonomics? The stand is a honeycomb-style metal frame that offers